Hey guys, welcome to Safety Pilot. Today we're going to be doing a commercial mock oral. I have Trent with me.
Hi guys.
And Trent will be in the role of the student preparing for his Checkride, and I'll be in the role of the DPE issuing the Checkride. We'll be going through the ACS, going through each category, making sure that we're answering all of the goal areas, and making it as thorough as possible in the time that we have. Are you ready to begin?
I'm ready.
All right, Trent, welcome to your commercial Checkride. You've showed me your documents today. Could you just quickly go over what were those documents that you brought in today?
Yeah, so I showed you my pilot certificate, currently private pilot certificate.
Okay.
I showed you my current third class medical that I have. I also showed you my government issued photo ID, as well as my logbook with everything I needed in 61-129 for my aeronautical experience.
Okay, beautiful. Yep, so we went through your logbooks, make sure that you had everything you needed, and all your photo IDs. Perfect. We're going to go into some more of your qualifications. So you talked about having your medical certificate. What sort of medical certificate do you need to operate under your commercial privileges?
You need a minimum of a second class medical.
Okay. And what class medical do you have right now?
Currently a third.
Okay, you have a third class, so you need a minimum of second class. Would you need that at all times when you're flying?
The medical, yes, you would.
Yeah, you would, but specifically your second class medical.
The second class medical you would need only for operating in commercial purposes.
Perfect, yep, only when you're doing your commercial privileges. Okay, what if you had some questions about what exactly is the difference between a second class and a first class medical? Do you know where you could find those answers?
Yeah, I can find that in the AIM here itself, or I can contact the FSDO.
Okay.
Medical information is 6123 in
Okay.
my AIM.
Yep, so in part
my
61.
Yep.
Yep. Is there another FAR that addresses medicals?
Not sure on that one.
Okay. You could take a glance in there quickly and see if that FAR AIM has it. One that specifically tells us what are the medical conditions for a first class, for a second class, and a third class.
Be 68, correct?
Yeah, go ahead and look at 68. If you have it in there.
91, 89. Sorry, 67.
There we go, 67. Yep. What does 68 give us? That's also relevant.
68 is requirements for operating certain small aircraft without a medical certificate.
Yeah, so that would be going to our basic med.
med.
Yeah, basic med. So 67 will tell us specifically what's the first, second, and third class, and what are some of the medical conditions that are allowed. Okay, so we found that in 68 we said is basic med. Are you allowed to do commercial operations under basic med?
No.
No, you're not. Okay, perfect. All right. We also talked about, you showed me your aeronautical experience requirements, but where would you find those? How can you say that I have met all of the requirements in terms of flight time and the types of flight, and I can become a commercial pilot now?
So those are outlined in 61-129.
Okay.
It goes through, so at the beginning you need at least 250 total flight hours, 100 hours in powered aircraft, of which 50 hours must be in airplane. 100 hours of pilot and command flight time, which includes at least 50 hours in airplanes, 50 hours in cross-country flight, at which at least 10 hours must be in airplanes.
Okay, perfect. We can stop there. That's good.
Okay.
Yep. So in 61-129, you can find all the commercial requirements, and that's exactly where you would point someone to go. Okay, so now you've shown me that you've met the requirements. You have your medical. You got your second class, so you're ready to go out into commercial operations. What are some of the privileges that now come with your commercial certificate?
And the main privilege is now I can operate an aircraft carrying persons or property for compensation or hire.
Okay, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other privileges you can think of?
Can also operate in, we'll call it special conditions such as firefighting.
Okay.
For also compensation and hire. Essentially, operating an aircraft for compensation or hire is what you're getting for your commercial license.
Okay, right. All right, and what would be some of the limitations that come along with it?
The biggest limitation is going to be if you are not instrument rated, you cannot take persons or passengers beyond or cross country of beyond 50 nautical miles or at night.
Okay. All right. What about some of the limitations in terms of, let's walk into our scenario here and come out with some of our limitations and privileges in this scenario. So you're working for a company, and at the company your boss decides to buy an aircraft that he's going to use to fly around to different work meetings.
Okay.
He finds out in the company that you are a commercial pilot, and he puts it together and he thinks, this is great, I have a commercial pilot, I'm just going to hire him as the company pilot to fly me around to my different work meetings. Would you be allowed to do this now as a commercial pilot?
So long as the boss is not making money for the actual flight itself, yes, I can.
Okay, so you can do it. What do you mean thereby if the boss is making money for the flight? Because he's doing it in purpose of his business, so he will be making money, otherwise he wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, but it's so long as it's not directly related to the flight, such as carrying persons or property for profit for the flight.
Okay, so as long as your boss isn't carrying persons or property for the flight, you can service his. So if he's just flying, you're dropping him off for a meeting and then picking him up, flying him back. That's okay.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. If your boss then was going to, let's say, start flying people and passengers for hire, what would he need to do?
He would need to be operating under a commercial certificate.
Okay.
So Part 121, 125, or 135.
Okay. Okay. Okay, well, let's go into those then before we come back to that. What is 121 that you mentioned?
121 is going to be essentially the big aircraft carriers. So your Delta, your United. I believe it's scheduled flights carrying more than 30 passengers, I believe. It's off the top of my head, that's what I remember for those restrictions.
Yeah, so that would be our airlines, we colloquially will say.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the difference there with 135?
And 135 is still operating essentially public, I consider it charter. It's like a NetJets, right? So you're still holding out the operations, but it's not on a scheduled basis. And
yeah, there we go, non-scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that'll be one of the big differences. And with, if you wanted to find out specifically what is the applicability of 121, who does that apply to in 135, where could you go to see that applicability?
You could contact the FSDO.
Trying to the FSDO. What about in your FARs?
That would be in section 119, if I remember
Okay.
right.
If you look at, why don't you go ahead and see there if you should have part 121. Go ahead and open up 121. Don't have 121. Do you have 135 there either?
We have 136 is the
Okay.
next one. So we have 119 to 136.
All right. So at the beginning of each of our parts, we would find applicability.
Applicability sections.
Yeah, applicability sections. So if I wanted to know, can I operate under 121, I can go to the very beginning of it and see if I am applicable, if I'm operating under, if it's applicable to me, if I have the right aircraft, the right operating regime. Okay, so coming back now to your boss. If your boss is starting to use these flights now to take on passengers, you start noticing that he showed up today with some people you've never seen before,
Mm-hmm.
and he's flying them out there, and you see some of them start slipping him some money. Can you continue doing these flights?
I would say no, not without the boss getting proper commercial certificates to operate.
Okay. And what would be the kind of technical term we use as pilots to describe what he's doing by bringing in new people?
That would be holding out. Is that?
Holding out is the word I was looking for, if I
Okay.
described it correctly. Yeah, so how would you describe holding out?
Holding out is pretty much offering. I find the best words to use here. Offering the transportation services, flying transportation services to the general public,
Okay.
whether that be through reaching out peer to peer, just advertising in a sense. I guess is the best way to go about it. So pretty much, it's not private. It's not for a single person. You're offering these services to the general public.
Okay. Yeah, or a section of the general public,
Mm-hmm.
more than just a couple people, essentially. Yeah. And you mentioned before, if they have a commercial operating certificate and they're operating under the right part, that is allowed, and you can keep flying for them.
Mhm.
You just need to make sure that they have that certificate if they are starting now to hold out. Okay, so in there, inherently, we have some of our limitations. You know, we can't just jump on any flight that's making money. You mentioned that self. It has to be operating under the right part and certificated if necessary. If you're starting to see some things that your boss is doing and you're just not sure if you should still be involved with it, if it's legal or not, what should you do? What can
Sorry,
you do?
can you ask that one more time?
Yeah, if you start seeing something that your boss is doing and you're starting to wonder if it's holding out, if it's legal or not, what can you do?
Well, talk to the boss for one, be like, hey, what are you doing? And number two, if I have any really doubts of what's going on, if something is legal or not, I would contact the FSDO and lay down the scenario for them.
Okay, perfect. All right, so you've deduced now that you are operating as a commercial pilot legally, and you're now going out to the aircraft and you want to make sure that it's in an airworthy condition.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe the term airworthy?
Airworthy means that it is going to be kept within airworthiness standards, so it's going to have essentially all its maintenance. So you go through your AV8's acronym, so all
Okay.
ADs are complied with. VOR if you're doing instrument, annuals, 100-hour inspections if you're operating for compensation or hire, which we're commercial, so assume that. Your airspeed, your altimeter, transponder, and your ELT check. So essentially all your maintenance would be checked to keep the airplane in airworthy condition. You'd also need to check for the aircraft documents or your aero, your airworthiness certificate, your registration, your operating limitations, and your weight and balance. And if you are operating internationally, your radio's license.
Okay, so how much, what are you doing before every flight? So you're coming out right now to this flight. What are you doing before this particular flight? Do you go through all this for every flight?
In a sense, yes. You need to, on a dispatch, right, they would say, or it is up to the pilot in command to make sure that, the aircraft is kept within an airworthy state. So knowing when an annual is due, an annual inspection, and AD, making sure the documents are in the aircraft.
Well, now here your boss, he's running late to this meeting, and he has you coming out to get the plane going. He's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, Trent, I'm hopping in this thing. Let's go. Are you gonna go through all of these? Are you gonna go through your AV8 and your Aero acronym? He's telling you, come on, Trent, I gotta go. What's your thought process there? Understanding that this aircraft is airworthy under those stresses.
As PIC, the liability falls on me, so I would pretty much have the authority to say, hold on, we need to verify that this plane is airworthy to fly.
Okay.
So make it fired, make it scolded, I don't know, but like I said, as PIC, that liability falls on me, so yeah, I would make that final decision.
Okay. So you talked about AV8 here. Walk me through what are you looking for when you talk about AV8?
AV8, and it depends on the type of operation you're doing, but essentially the biggest one is you want to make sure that the aircraft is within annual and 100-hour inspection.
Okay.
Those are obviously 100-hour every 100 hours, and annual inspection every 12 calendar months. If you're going to be operating with instrument, you'd have to have your VOR check in the preceding 30 days. You would need your pitot-static transponder test every 24 calendar months and ELT check every 12 calendar months, and then ADs are also complied with.
Okay. All right. So what is an AD?
AD is an airworthiness directive. They can be essentially one-time or recurring actions that must be complied with. You can find ADs on the FAA website. They'll post those per aircraft, make and model. Yeah, and like I said, they must be complied with, and the AD itself will tell you whether it's a grounding scenario, or if it's still safe for flight, but must be complied with. All ADs must be complied with, essentially.
Okay. And is that also your responsibility to make sure those have been complied with?
No, it is actually up to the owner operator of the aircraft to make sure they are complied with.
Mm-hmm.
But it is up to the PIC to verify that the plane is kept in an airworthy state, and if an AD is not been essentially taken action upon,
Mm-hmm.
then the aircraft would be unairworthy. So it
Okay.
would be the PIC's job to say that this airplane is unairworthy, but the
Okay.
owner operator's job to comply with the AD.
Okay. Well, now your owner or your boss, as the owner of the aircraft, got a letter in the mail, and it's a special airworthiness information bulletin, and in it prescribes a check that needs to be done on this aircraft. And now your boss has come to you and said, "Hey Trent, I just got this letter in the mail. It says that it's recommending we do this inspection. Can we go fly, or do we need to do this inspection?" It's a special airworthiness information bulletin. Would that be something that he has to get done before you can fly?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, so you would tell your boss that this, we need to get this done
Mm-hmm.
rather than waiting. Well, he's saying, it's going to be expensive. We're going to have to cancel a whole week of travel plans. Is there any way, we can just wait and not do this?
The only way that you could possibly do it is to call the FSDO and ask for
Okay.
a ferry permit.
Okay.
If it's within the boundaries of essentially, considering the aircraft airworthy.
So you've mentioned the ADs are mandatory work that needs to be done. How would you describe the difference between an AD and a SABE, a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin?
I guess I'm unfamiliar with the SABE.
Okay, so that would be something we could look into.
Mm-hmm.
A SABE, and looking into, is that something that needs to be done right away? Could it be put off, or is it something that even needs to be done? A SAIB, SAIB, Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin. All right. Those are not mandatory.
Okay.
We'll leave it there. All right, the recommendations. Okay, so the mechanic now has looked at the aircraft. He's gone through the ADs, and as far as you're concerned, the aircraft is in airworthy condition. You've gone through Aviate. Everything seems to be up to date. Now, before today's flight, the mechanic comes to you and says that the vacuum pump is broken. Okay.
Okay.
Your boss still wants to fly. He says it's perfect VFR. Why do you need those artificial horizons anyway? It's VFR. You can see out the window. Let's go fly.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to approach this conversation?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would check if the aircraft had a minimum equipment list.
Okay. Say it does not have that.
It does not have that. Do they have a kind of equipment list, a KEL?
It does. I'm guessing. So if we go off of your, you said a Cessna 177 Bravo.
Yep.
Yeah, I believe that would have one. Where would you find it if it had it?
It would be in the pilot operating handbook.
Okay. Do you know where at what chapter?
Not off the top of my head. I could go through.
I would start at chapter 6.
Okay.
So you could look in there. Do you have it actually with you?
I-
Here on the iPad?
I do. Let's see here. And we'll go to my documents. POH 177, section 6. Section 6 is operational data in our POH supplement.
Okay. See if you can find it there or in a different chapter.
I don't remember our airplane specifically having either an MEL or a KEL.
Okay.
I have gone through this POH supplement, so section 7, that's all performance.
Mm-hmm.
Section 7 is optional equipment. And that's all we have on that.
Okay, so let's say you can't find it in there. It might not be in there. I would give it a good thorough look. If you can't find, if your aircraft does not have a kind of equipment list, what's your next step?
And then we'd be going into 91205.
Okay.
So your 8 tomato flames.
Okay.
So we would see that in an 8 tomato flames, if we were going VFR, you said the vacuum pump went out.
Yep.
All right, so that's only going to be driving our directional gyro and our attitude indicator. For VFR, those are not required pieces of equipment, so we could disable those, label them in-op, write in the aircraft maintenance book that the equipment is inoperative, and we can go flying.
Okay.
Without.
So you'd be okay flying without that, as long as you can confirm that it's not going to cause a safety concern to flight.
Correct.
You
Yes.
can go with that. Okay.
VFR only.
All right. Well, your boss is certainly going to be happy. Let's say now you've determined that this aircraft needs to have a vacuum pump, and your boss is now asking you to fly it over to the next door airport. It's about 50 miles away for maintenance to get it fixed. So you've determined that it's required equipment. You're going 50 miles away. Can you take that aircraft over for the maintenance?
So long as I apply for a special ferry permit.
Okay. Yep, special airworthiness flight permit. And how would you get that?
By contacting the FSDO.
Yeah. Okay. Or you can also talk to a designated airworthiness representative in the FSDO. Okay. Good. So that's fine with me. So you've now determined that you're safe to make a flight. Your boss wants you to fly now to. We'll go into your planning here for the cross country you've prepared. So walk me through where are you going?
We are going to Green Bay.
And who are you taking with you?
We are going to be taking 3 passengers. Let's stand by here. Push this up to the map. So for our weight and balance, let me see here. I have performance charts here. I built a spreadsheet for.
Okay.
So we'll be taking myself, a pilot, 180 pounds, and 3 passengers, 1 at 225 pounds, 1 at 200 pounds, 1 at 130 pounds. And we'll be carrying 60 pounds of baggage in the main baggage compartment, and then we default 5 pounds in the aft baggage compartment for essentially oil and rags and everything that you carry within the plane. That allows us to carry 20 gallons of fuel, which puts us just about 5 pounds under gross, which is 2,500 pounds total.
Okay. How far can you go with those 20 gallons?
Without reserve, we can actually make it to Green Bay, which was approximately 221 nautical miles. But we obviously need reserve. Minimum VFR reserve during the day is 30 minutes, so we need an additional 5 gallons. My personal minimum is, regardless, VFR day or night, is 1 hour. So an additional 9 gallons would be needed to carry on the airplane.
Okay. So are you going to make a stop
Yep.
on your way?
Yep. So we'll make a stop in Eau Claire.
Okay. So you're departing here. What's your airport of departure?
It
South
is-
St. Paul?
Yep. South St. Paul, Kilo, Sierra, Gulf, Sierra.
Okay. And you'll be flying down to Green Bay?
Yep.
And you're going to stop at Eau Claire?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. We'll jump into that route here in a second. How do you decide if the weather is good for your flight here? Can you walk me through where do you get your what's your source for your weather?
Yeah, so I do kind of consider my Outlook briefing through Aviation Weather Center. I think they have really fantastic, their graphical forecasts are amazing. And then I do my standard briefing through ForeFlight, so we can go through that right now.
Yeah, let's go into that.
So we can see here today we have current surface weather analysis chart. We're kind of in an area of high pressure right now with no frontal activity. It's actually a very nice day to go flying.
Okay. Actually, can we go back quickly to that
Yep.
page?
Absolutely.
We'll just address a couple things here.
Mhm.
We have up there from coming in from the north of Minnesota. What is that?
That is a cold front coming in up there.
Okay, and what would that signify if we have that cold front moving in?
Cold fronts are typically associated with some more vertical development in weather, so usually showery precipitation coming with a cold front, and if it's associated with a low pressure zone as well, which we do have a trough here, so you can see some parts of Wisconsin are actually getting a little bit of cloud coverage with that trough coming through and that low pressure area as well.
Okay, so would it generally be good or bad weather?
Or
So
generally
for-
bad weather.
Bad weather, yeah, bad weather coming in with the front. What about winds? What would you expect to happen with winds?
Wind direction will change going across a front.
Okay,
Mhm.
so, and then temperatures, obviously, what would happen with that?
And then change in temperature, right? So you're going to have colder temperatures behind a cold front.
Okay, and we have these lines here as well, running across. We have one that says 1012, 1016. What are those lines?
Yeah, those are our isobar lines, so those are areas of constant pressure. So wind typically travels perpendicular to those isobar lines from areas of high pressure to low pressure.
Okay. Do you know what the basis of high and low pressure is? You know, if we look at this line here, 1012, would you say that that's low or high pressure?
That is high, so that's low, so 1013 millibars is standard pressure.
Yeah, about. So, yeah, so it doesn't have to be that. Just because it says low doesn't mean it's that low necessarily. Okay. And what kind of weather would we see with a low pressure?
Low pressure is usually associated with cumulus clouds, shower precipitation, and good visibility, and essentially lifting force, so an unstable lapse rate. So, yeah, low pressures are usually focused or have thunderstorms associated with them.
Okay. What would lead to the good visibility that would come with a low pressure?
Good visibility is associated with the low pressure because you are getting the lifting force, so it is essentially carrying stuff up into the higher atmosphere.
Okay. Yeah, you could say that. Still, though, with a low pressure, we're going to have a lot of particles that are going to be brought into the area, sort of like a vacuum. So, let's see. If one other thing we could ask here, we have these dashed black lines. How would you describe those black dashed lines?
And those are troughs, so those are areas of low pressure.
Okay, extending off the front. Okay,
Mhm.
so based on this picture alone, what could you say about your flight path today?
I would say leaving here out of Minneapolis looks fine. We're clear. We might be picking up some cloud coverage as we get closer to Green Bay with that trough and cold front moving in.
Okay, and as you head east there, what's happening with the pressure?
And as we head east, the pressure is reducing, which means that we will be probably getting into more turbulent air.
Okay, it could be.
Mhm.
Yeah, you definitely could be. But you're aware that you're moving into a lower pressure area the farther you go. But only 220 miles, not too much of a change. All right, we can move on to the next part of our brief here.
And we got METARs here, so everything. And the map looks clear. We can just go through. We'll decode one here. So the top one here, here at South St. Paul, KSGS. It was posted on 30th day of the month, 16. Go back here. There you go. It was posted at 16:15 Zulu. This is an automated report. Winds are 290 at 12, gusting 15. We have I was drawing a blank there. 2,700 feet overcast, 33,000. I'm going to come back to that one. Visibility 10 statute miles clear. Temperature 22, altimeter temperature 22, dew point 8, altimeter 29 or 9 or 3. We have a precipitation discriminator. And then these are, the last bits are more precise temperature and dew point readings.
Keep going. All right, so the one thing I'll go back over is just the
The 27.
yeah, what's the 27V330?
27,000. It's overcast 33. What's the 270 for this? It's overcast 33,000. Oh no, because that'd be overseas.
All right, where could you go to figure this out?
I'm going my aim here. I might tap and retard decode here. Occupant time, view haze, not wind shear. OV. I'm at a loss for this one. We'll have to keep on moving.
Okay. One thing you can look at here is look at each category. So we move through and we have wind, then visibility, then clouds, and then so on. Temperature, dew point, altimeter setting. So it kind of goes in a thematic
Variable
transition.
winds.
There you go.
270, variable at 330.
Yeah, so we never moved away from winds. So
Mhm.
just winds a variable from 270 and 330. Okay, good. Is that a report that's fine for you flying today? Will that allow you to fly?
That is, yes.
Okay, we can go on then to the next. PIREPs, we can move on as well. And yeah, we'll go to TAF. So why don't we read through one TAF as well?
TAF, so our closest TAF here is Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Posted on the 30th day of the month, 14:53 Zulu. It's valid from the 30th to the 31st at 15 to 1800 Zulu. Winds are 300 at 13, gusting 21. Visibility greater than 6 statute miles and broken 20,000. For the time of departure,
That's fine. We just line. Just make sure you know how to read through them.
Yep.
That's fine. Okay, good. We can move on.
Wind charts. So we can see that we have predominantly northerly winds. Temperatures are about going to be 12 degrees Celsius across our whole. We'll go to the winds aloft table here, which is what I used to calculate our nav log.
Okay.
Right here. And then
Going back to the winds aloft. What altitudes are winds aloft forecasted at?
3,000, 6,000, 9,000.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And then so on. Okay, so right now, what altitude did you pick for your flight?
3,500 feet.
So where does it get the information for that flight level?
So it interpolates between 3,000 and 6,000 feet.
Perfect. All right. That's good.
Then we have some NOTAMs here. These are just departure NOTAMs, so some obstructions, all predominantly with Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport because they're doing construction there.
Okay.
We have no FTC NOTAMs.
What's an FTC NOTAM?
FTC NOTAM is any NOTAM that is in effect to essentially a federal document, so such as a procedure chart, a VFR chart, an instrument chart, a published approach, etc. You also get those with TFRs as well.
Okay. All right. All right. We can move on from the NOTAMs now. As you're going along this flight now, or you've looked at the weather. Are you gonna make this flight? I mean, how's the weather playing?
I would. This weather is fine to make this flight.
Okay. As you're flying along, you said as you're flying east, the weather could get a little bit worse, some lower pressure, and maybe some clouds coming in from the lakes. As you're flying along, some thunderstorms start to develop, and you're also given a redirect from ATC. So ATC gives you a redirect right into a thunderstorm. How do you respond to that?
I would pretty much tell ATC cannot comply. The pilot has control of the flight, and you can tell ATC you can, essentially for emergency situations, you can deviate from any rule or anything ATC tells you. Now this wasn't necessarily be an emergency, but you just tell ATC unable to comply, due to thunderstorm activity.
Okay, perfect. All right. So one of the things that we, I guess, what is one source of thunderstorm data that we can receive? What's like really the source of
SIGMETs.
SIGMETs? Okay. And where would you find a SIGMET?
You can find SIGMETs. They are in the imagery. Here we should have SIGMETs here. Yep. So these are the current convective SIGMETs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I see. Yeah. So, and then how would you compare that to an AirMet?
So SIGMET, significant weather. So that is the most hazardous type of weather phenomenon, and AirMets are still hazardous to aircraft and pilots, but not as severe. In AirMets, you get AirMet Sierra, Zulu, and Tango. Tango is turbulence. Sierra is IFR conditions or mountain obstruction.
Okay.
And Zulu is icing conditions.
Okay, perfect. Yep. So you'll check those before your flights. Going there into icing, obviously flying here in the northern states, we get icing.
Mm-hmm.
How would you determine the freezing level?
We can check it right here.
Was there anything that we already looked at that would give us a good idea of the freezing level?
Our winds and temperatures aloft.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can look and see when it starts freezing. What is this that you're looking at here?
This is a really pretty chart. That's what this is.
Okay, well, how can you determine that? Let's look at central Minnesota, where you are right now. What would be the freezing level?
Our freezing level is going to be, there's my legend down there. I was looking for that. Freezing level is going to be about 13,000 feet.
Okay. Let's say for today's flight that you needed to be above 13,000 feet. Would that change your decision to go or not go?
It could, if the Cardinal can make it up to 13,000 feet.
Yeah, right. Well,
but yeah, theoretically, it could. The Cardinal is not approved for flight into known icing.
Okay.
But just because an AirMet is published for icing doesn't mean that it's known icing.
Sure.
So you'd have to check PIREPs.
Right. And so looking at this chart then, is there guaranteed to be icing at 14,000 feet?
No.
Okay. What are the conditions that would need to be there for icing to be present?
So you would need some sort of moisture source, so clouds, freezing rain, etc.
Yeah.
And obviously below freezing temperature.
Yeah. So you need the temperature and you need the visible moisture. Okay. All right, we said we're going for it. So let's walk through your flight plan then. Show me you talked about the route. Why did you choose the route? You mentioned your fuel stop. That's why you're going to Eau Claire.
Yep.
Why did you pick this route? Why did you pick the altitude you picked?
Yes. So DPE did request, my actual DPE, requested stop or essentially waypoints every 20 or so nautical miles. So there are quite a few stops on the way to Green Bay here. We will stop in Eau Claire for fuel. We chose 3,500 for two reasons. One is winds aloft didn't really help us at all for higher altitudes. And the other bit is just to stay under this Bravo shelf at 4,000. Now, can we climb up higher if we needed to? Yes, but for ease of Checkride purposes and ease of navigation logs, I didn't want to have to do 4 different top of climb calculations.
Now, is that a decision that's really going to affect the way you fly when you're flying?
No.
Not wanting to have to do calculations?
No.
Okay, good. Especially with how easy technology has made it.
Exactly.
Go higher, even if you have to calculate it. Okay. So this is the route that you've picked. You said your altitude sounds basically based on ease of flight and staying underneath the Bravo shelf. Okay. And then the waypoints that you picked every 20 or so miles, why did you pick them? What was your criteria for picking them?
So criteria for picking them, again, were every 20 or so miles. They were all visual reference points, so such as towns or, VFR known waypoints such as Hastings or the Pine Belt Refinery here, which are noted here on the sectional with the little flag. And then they were also picked to stay out of the MOA here.
Okay. What is an MOA?
Military operating area.
All right. Are you allowed to fly through it?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Okay. Did you file a flight plan for this flight? Are you going to?
I will, yes.
You will. Okay. How are you going to do that?
I can do that through ForeFlight here. I can go into flights, go back in here, and we can just hit proceed to file right there.
Okay. What kind of information do you need to put into this to file a flight plan?
I need to put in the aircraft type, aircraft equipment, essentially everything that ForeFlight is having here shown, number of people on board, true airspeed for VFR flights. Yep.
Okay. So do you have to file a flight plan for this flight?
No.
When would you have to file a flight plan?
If we were doing instrument.
Okay. Is that the only time?
For VFR, no. I'd say yes, no. Yes, no. You got me on that one.
Okay, obviously if you're, for instrument, do you mean flying instrument flight rules?
Yes.
Okay, so all the conditions when you'd need to file, so there's a couple different times when you'd need to file for instrument flight rules. So obviously all of those going into Class A airspace, special VFR at night, and cloud below day
Yeah,
VFR.
if you're flying
Yeah.
instrument.
Anything else? Any other times when you would need to file a flight plan?
For a VFR flight, no.
What if you're crossing a border?
Oh.
Yeah,
No.
just being a little tricky there.
It'd
Yeah,
be
so
tricky. See, I'm on my mind of like going to
okay,
Green Bay.
You're
I'm
close
like,
enough to the border. Yeah.
Cheesehead's gonna get me.
Okay. Obviously, too, if you're going into special use airspace like the Seafare, the Freeze, you'd need to file a special flight plan. But yeah, so that's just being tricky. All right, we're going to talk now a little bit about if the weather gets bad, or it could also be a maintenance issue. But I want to see just how you would handle a deviation. So you're approaching Eau Claire. You're not at Eau Claire yet, and the weather ahead is looking bad. So you get a deviation. I can look at this. To fly down. Fly up. Yeah, it looks like up here to looks like Rice Lake Regional. So you're gonna have to divert up there. That's where you've decided that the best weather is, and it looks like they have fuel there as well. So can you make that diversion? Let's say you're only 15 minutes or 15 miles west of Eau Claire when you need to make the diversion.
Okay, so we're about here.
And I want to really hear about your fuel situation. That's our purpose here. So you're 15 miles west of Eau Claire when you need to make a diversion north to Rice Lake Regional. I want to know, can you make it to Rice Lake? And if you make it there, how much fuel do you have left?
Yeah, let me do that calculation real
And if
quick.
you can't make it, where else could you go?
Yep, let me do that calculation real quick. I'll pull up my calculator, aka my phone. And we're not quite to Eau Claire, we're going to Rice Lake. is going to be EAU 2, so total distance to Rice Lake is RPD. So it's 34 miles, so we will have burned 8 gallons by the time we get to Eau Claire. So say we're stopping a little short, we'll just call it 8 gallons to be easy. So we still have 12 gallons left. And going at estimated true airspeed is 110 to go 34 miles. Looking about 18 minutes and burning 8 gallons an hour. We'll call it 9 gallons an hour. And what did I say, times 18? So yeah, so we burn an extra 3 gallons. So we have burned 11 gallons by the time we get to Rice Lake. And we can carry 20, so we'll have plenty to divert.
So that 110 knots true airspeed, how did you get that?
That is from the POH supplement. So this is without working in wind correction yet.
Just thinking about getting kind of an understanding of what's going around you. Which way is the wind blowing?
The wind is coming from the north. So
and how strong was that wind at your altitude?
That wind was at 9 knots. So
okay,
we'll
so
consider -9.
Yeah, so not
So
terribly
call it
strong.
100,
Yeah. So could you throw that into just reduce your true airspeed and see what that would give you?
Yeah, so we could say our ground speed is now 100, and to go 34 miles would take us 20 minutes, so an extra 2 minutes. So 9. Let me say 20. So yeah, so that was 3 gallons versus 2.1.
Okay. So you're telling me it's not bad.
I'm telling you it's not bad.
All right, beautiful. Okay. Do you feel confident making those calculations in the air?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how would you make those? I mean, do you fly with an E6B calculator like this, or do you have an iPad to make these corrections in the air?
I fly with the iPad.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's capable of making these calculations in the air?
Yep, so it does it all right here. So it would tell me, and for flight obviously is a little conservative, it tells me to take 4 gallons.
Okay. To make that
flight
Okay.
diversion. Yeah, KRPD.
All right. Looking at flight following, if you were to get flight following for this flight, how would that be different than filing a flight plan?
So you don't need to file a flight plan to get flight following. I typically get flight following anyways. I don't really file flight plans much anymore unless I'm doing instrument. So pretty much is you're contacting the controlling authority to get weather and traffic advisories along your route. And it's best practice because then you're kind of in their system. They know where you are, where you're going, who you are, etc. So they can also help in emergency situations for VFR flight following.
All right. Are there any negatives associated with flight following from your perspective?
The only negatives is if it's a busy day for controllers and they can't help you.
Okay.
So they may say, Cardinal 623, yeah, have a nice flight. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Yeah. Right. But you can always try.
Yep.
All right. How would you handle the iPad failing then? We've talked about that's what you use to make a deviation. If that iPad failed on you in flight, what's your plan?
I do have a 430 in the aircraft, so I can program the 430 into there.
Okay.
And conveniently that also gives me ground speed, so I can do my calculations. I have my phone with me, or I even have old calculator sitting in my bag.
All right.
To do those calculations if I need to.
All right, that sounds great. All right, we'll jump into some of the airspace here. If you open up your sectional again, I want you to don't take too much time, but just walk me through all the classes of airspace where you can find them.
Yep. So we'll start off here. I'll kind of declutter the screen here a bit. That's annoying. Okay. So yeah, so we'll start here. So we'll be taking off out of South St. Paul Fleming. We are underneath the Class Bravo shelf. So the Class Bravo airport around the Minneapolis airport. Bravo is going to be the solid blue rings here.
Okay.
Our ceiling, or excuse me, our ceiling for our non-Bravo airspace, so the floor of the Bravo airspace above us is going to be at 2,300 feet, located here, and the ceiling of the Bravo airspace is 10,000 feet.
Okay, perfect.
And that does climb out as we go out.
Okay, that's good for Bravo. Next.
Yep, so around Red Wing, we have what is a Class E airspace. That's the shaded magenta here. Now that's Class E down to 700 feet AGL.
Okay.
We can keep going here. Eau Claire, the dash blue line, that is a Class Delta airspace that is surrounded by a Class E that's down to 700 feet AGL.
And what would be the height, the bottom and the ceiling of the Delta?
The bottom is at the surface and the ceiling is 3,500
Okay.
feet.
And then we didn't mention that with Echo as well. What would be the ceiling of the Echo?
The ceiling of the Echo is up to but not including 18,000.
Okay.
So up to Class A.
Okay.
We do have, which we talked about, the MOAs here.
Yeah, we can just stick with the classifications. We'll go into special use airspace later.
Okay, yep, another Class Delta along our route at central Wisconsin with a ceiling of 38. And then more Class E. And then Green Bay is actually a Class Charlie airspace with ceiling at 4,700 feet. That first shelf floor is 1,900.
Okay.
And then down to the surface.
All right, beautiful. All right, where would we find Gulf airspace?
Gulf airspace is pretty much all the airspace from the surface up to the overlying airspace. So if it's
Okay.
Class E, it would be up to 1,200 feet if it's not noted on here, 700 feet, or obviously these Class Cs are right at the surface, so there is no Class G underneath that.
Okay. All right, and then Alpha.
Alpha is starting at 18,000 feet and up to and including flight level, essentially 60,000, so flight level 600.
Okay, beautiful. Any other classifications there of airspace besides special use airspace?
We got B, we got A, B, C, D, E. We missed, there is a surface E, so we have, let's see if we can find one here for an example. There's one. So right around Rhinelander, so that dashed magenta, that is a Class E airspace down to the surface.
Okay, perfect. All right, what would be some limitations in Class Echo airspace?
Your limitations are essentially your visibility, so 3,152 if you're flying VFR. So 3 miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below clouds, and 2,000 feet horizontally. That's below 10,000 feet.
Okay.
Class E airspace above 10,000 is 5,111, so 5 miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, 1 mile horizontally from clouds.
Okay, what about Delta airspace?
Delta is your 3,152, so
Okay.
same as the Class E below 10,000. Class C is the same. And then Class Bravo is 3 miles clear of clouds.
Okay, that's good. All right, can you point out some special use airspace? You mentioned MOAs already. Anything else you can find?
Yep, so in that MOA itself, we do have some restricted airspace here.
Okay. What does that tell you?
So that tells us that, so restricted airspace is airspace that we can enter, but we do need permission from the controlling authority to enter that airspace. Now, restricted airspace could be areas of controlled firing, missiles, bombs, artillery, you name it. So obviously, if the restricted airspace is active, you are, 1, not allowed to fly through it, and
Okay.
2, you should be very well aware if it is active or not.
Okay, and how can you find out if that area is active?
You can contact the controlling authority, the
Okay.
ATC authority for that area.
Okay. Who else could you contact? There's another entity that's
Flight services.
flight service stations. Yep. As long as they're still around.
Mhm.
And then what's another publication, something that's published that we can check that often has information about these?
If it's active or not,
Yeah. Not for all areas, but for a lot of areas.
would a NOTAM?
Yeah,
be posted
NOTAMs.
in
Yep, check your NOTAMs. All right. Perfect. What are some other types of special use airspace? That's a prohibited or restricted area.
Yeah, so we have restricted areas, we have prohibited areas. We can give an example. The boundary waters is prohibited.
Okay.
So that's prohibited, so that is essentially not allowed to enter.
Okay.
Is prohibited.
Yep.
You have controlled firing areas. I'm trying to remember, and I'm trying to remember the acronym.
That's fine. We don't need to talk
NECPAC.
about all of them. Just
Yeah.
just a couple of them you mentioned.
Mm.
That's fine. All right. All right. Moving on to your airplane now. So we've looked at our flight path. We're confident in that. What is the service ceiling of your plane, and how could you figure that out?
The service ceiling of the airplane, we can find that by going into here and going into our operating limitations section.
And what is the service ceiling?
The service ceiling is 14,600 feet.
Okay. And what does that tell us about the airplane?
That means that at 14,600 feet, we would no longer be able to sustain a 500 foot per minute climb rate.
500.
Is it 500 feet? That'd be a lot. No.
That'd be a pretty good climb.
I'd say, yeah, that one's not right, so. Is it 200 feet a minute?
So we can look that up. Some
Yeah.
probably one might say it's 100 foot per minute, but so a certain amount of a climb gradient.
Yeah.
Okay. And 14,000, 1,600 is your plane. So we can go up at 13,000 feet, like we wanted to. Perfect. Beautiful. What are some considerations if we're going to go that high? So your plane can go up to 14,600 feet. Let's say we're going up to 13,000 feet, carrying passengers. What are your considerations concerning oxygen?
Oxygen, for any part of the flight beyond 30 minutes above 12.5, we have the crew, required crew has to be using oxygen.
Okay.
Above 14,000, for the entire duration above 14,000, required crew has to be on oxygen, and above 15,000 feet, crew has to be on oxygen, and passengers have to be essentially have oxygen available.
Okay. All right. Getting into some aerodynamics here and performance. What is VY and VX, and what's their difference?
VY is going to be 79 miles per hour.
Okay.
And VX is going to be 69 miles per hour. So VX is the best climb gradient, so most altitude over a given distance, and VY is your best rate of climb, so most altitude for a time rate.
Okay. Can you say that again? So we have the rate of climb
And
we,
gradient, so
and the
angle.
Angle. Yeah, angle of climb. Okay. And VX, how would you describe VX?
Is
that
the
having to do with-
angle.
Okay. And then VY would be the opposite.
Mhm.
What happens to VX and VY as we go up?
As we go up, well, performance would decrease. They would stay the same. Would they stay the same? They increase.
Think about what do we need excess of in order
We need
to climb?
Air. They just need
We need air.
air.
Yeah. But in order to
as we go up, we have less density, so we would have to go faster.
we have to go faster. What do you mean by that?
So the airspeed would need to be higher then.
Okay.
Would they increase?
Well, our indicated airspeed won't change in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's something to look into as well. Is what happens to VX and VY, and what is their relationship to service ceiling? You'll find that they attract each other. well, they don't affect each other. They become the same as you get higher, because you'll look into your performance curve, your excess thrust, excess lift,
Mm-hmm.
and as you go up, you don't have that anymore, and that's what you need for climb, for your pitch attitude. So I won't go into a whole teaching lesson here, but Vx and Vy relationship as you climb. We'll go into then a performance takeoff and descent here. So let's go through a short field takeoff and descent and landing. So talk to me about what technique would you use for a short field takeoff, and then how would you calculate your distance?
So you just use your short field takeoff technique. For the Cardinal, it is 15 degrees of flaps. 15 degrees of flaps. Use all available runway that you have to you. Essentially apply all power with aircraft stopped, so verify all engine instruments are in the green. You'll keep the tail slightly low.
Okay.
And then as soon as you reach VX, which is 69 miles an hour, you would maintain climb at 69 miles an hour until clear of obstacles.
Okay.
You can calculate that from, let's see if I can rotate this. I don't know if I can rotate this in
Okay.
ForeFlight, but
That's
I
fine.
can
Yeah, I can
calculate
see
it
it
from
there.
the takeoff data sheet.
Okay. Yep. So we look at our data sheets there and our POH, and we can calculate that then. What about a short field landing? What's your technique for a short field landing?
Short field landing is going to be full flaps. So on the Cardinal, we have 30 degrees of flaps. We'll bring it down. We would need to hit a spot in ACS, I believe was it's -0 plus 100 feet. And then once on the ground, simulated or max braking.
Okay. How would then, let's go back into the performance, a short field takeoff. How would a 20 knot headwind affect your ground roll?
It would decrease the ground roll.
What about then your rate of climb? How would it affect your rate of climb?
It would, the rate of climb would maintain constant because that's time based.
Sure.
Yeah, because that's based off of your indicated airspeed.
Okay. And then what about your angle of climb?
Your angle of climb would increase.
Yeah, would be better. Okay. What about then if we're taking off with a tailwind? Let's say we're landing with a tailwind.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a 20 knot tailwind on our landing. How is that going to increase, or how's that going to affect our touchdown?
It would increase our ground roll.
Okay.
Our touchdowns.
How would it affect our approach speed?
Our approach speed indicated would maintain the same, but our ground speed would be higher because
Okay.
we're having
Perfect.
tailwind.
All right. So even with the 20 knot tailwind, you're going to come in with the same approach speed?
Indicated, yes, but ground speed would be higher.
Yeah, I'm talking about indicated airspeed.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. What if we have a gust factor? Let's say we have a headwind of 10 gusting 20. Would that affect your approach speed?
That would. I would come in a little bit faster, and I would not be using full flaps.
Okay. Well, talk to me about that. Why wouldn't you use full flaps?
I would not use full flaps because pretty much if I did have essentially a gust, so say I was having indicated I was coming in at 60, 65 knots, hence I would also be at a higher airspeed. With full flaps, I'm a little bit more susceptible to the wind. And then with an increased airspeed, so say I lost, say we had a shift of wind shear or a shift in the wind, and I lost 20 knots of airspeed. If I was right on that, stall line, I'd pretty much be falling out of the air, so I'd come in at a little higher or faster approach speed.
Okay. But wouldn't lowered flaps allow us to come in at a lower that stall level?
It would.
Okay, so why are we raising the flaps up?
Let's take on this one. I'd say I'd just be a little less susceptible to the gust.
Okay,
Yeah, we have an increased wing area now.
Okay, so what do you mean by less susceptible?
I wouldn't get blown around as much.
Okay. And what would be the cause of that? Having more wing area?
Yeah.
Anything else? Is there anything
I mean,
else?
there's a lot
Is there anything else that you would also do as a result of having less flaps that would help with controllability?
But, I'm not quite.
I just want to have a good idea of why you'd raise your flaps for coming in on a gusty wind.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't be all the way up. I'd probably.
Yeah, just a little bit lesser
Yeah.
degree. You want more wing area. I got that, and you're saying that's going to give you better lift.
That would be.
Is that going to give you better controllability?
It'd be better controllability of the
Okay.
airplane.
Are you still going to come in at your VREF, your same approach speed?
It'll be a little higher,
Okay, and what would that do?
and that would give me more controllability anyways.
Why?
Because I have more air going over the control
Yeah,
surfaces.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's kind of what I was getting.
Oh, okay.
Might be a benefit. Yeah. Your ailerons need wind over them
Mm-hmm.
or air coming over them, and so faster approach speed will give you better aileron control, regardless of flap position. All right. How would a weight shift affect your performance? So let's say we have a very far forward CG
Mhm.
and we move it to the back.
Moving the CG back would increase performance. However, we want to make sure that we aren't too far back, because then it would essentially make the airplane unstable if the CG is behind the CG limit.
Okay. Yeah, if it gets beyond the CG limit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about our stall characteristics?
Stall characteristics are stall airspeed. Oh, I need to remember this one. If we move the CG back, the stall airspeed. I know we're more efficient in flight.
Okay. Talk to me just about the recovery then.
The recovery in flight is if we had a stall, right, is going to be nose down and full power.
Would you expect it to be easier with aft CG or forward CG?
It'd be easier with forward CG.
Yeah, that's just what we'll go with for that. All right, moving into some of the systems of your aircraft. What kind of power plant do you have on your airplane?
We have a Continental O360.
Okay. Can you describe it in a little more detail?
Yeah, horizontally opposed 4-cylinder, 180 horsepower.
Okay. How is it cooled?
It is air cooled.
Okay. All right. So if it starts getting hot, what can you do to cool it down?
We have cow flaps, and we can also we have cow flaps on the airplane, and then increase the airspeed, so the amount of air that's flowing through the cowling.
What about leaning the mixture? How can that affect the cooling of the engine?
Leaning actually increases the temperature of the engine, so the richer you'd run the engine, the more cool it'll operate. Excuse me.
Okay, yeah, to a certain extent. And what causes that?
That is because some of the energy is actually being absorbed by the fuel itself, the unburned fuel.
What energy
The actual combustion energy
is being absorbed by the fuel?
isn't.
So what would lead to a rich mixture being cooler than a lean mixture?
Because you have excess fuel
Okay.
and you have unburnt fuel.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So I mean that's what's going to be caused.
So part of that is you don't have peak efficiency,
correct.
so not all the fuel is burning.
So would some of the heat be absorbed by the unburned fuel?
Yeah, okay. If you put it that way, yeah, some of the
that's-
heat energy would be
Yeah,
absorbed
that's okay.
because the fuel is cold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that answer a little bit better.
Okay.
It might have been what you meant from the beginning, but when you just say energy, we have energy of
Energy.
motion, energy of heat.
Mechanical energy.
Yeah, there's lots of
heat
different types of energies going on. But the heat energy is absorbed because the fuel is cold. Basically, fuel cools it off. What would happen? What are some of the things that could go wrong if we have improper mixture management in flight, in cruise? So we're in cruise, let's say we're too rich.
If we are too rich, that really you just not have the air-fuel mixture correct, so you would have just poor performance. The engine could start running rough.
Okay. What would you expect to cause it to run rough?
Expect it to cause run. I mean,
Why would you say it would run rough?
because it just would be burning inefficiently. You'd have a lot of excess fuel that wouldn't be burned.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, so we have an inefficient. We're not at our peak efficiency.
mhm.
Yeah, improperly burned fuel can lead to deposits, carbon deposits, which can affect spark plugs. What about specifically though, in terms of our cross country? What is a very real thing that we could experience if we were running too rich?
Spark plug fouling.
Spark plug fouling, yeah, but running at a high. I said that, but running
Oh,
at a high
yeah.
RPM, it's not as likely to happen. But what about in terms of making it to our destination?
Oh, not having enough fuel because
Yeah.
we're running extra rich.
We're burning more than we expected to burn. Our calculations done by the POH are usually set for a specific lean setting. If we're not leaning out, we could be burning too much fuel. Yeah, that's what we're going for. And what if we're too lean? Besides, loss of efficiency, what else? Something we just kind of talked about.
That would be if we're running too lean, then we wouldn't have enough fuel to be burning. So I'm trying to remember if that was. Did you get detonation off of that?
Okay. Yes, that could happen. One of the things that could lead to that is kind of the answer that I want to hear. It's related to what we were just talking about when we first started talking about the engine.
Like a cooling.
Cooling.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so if we're running too lean, we could be running too hot,
Mm-hmm.
which could lead to detonation or to pre-ignition. All right, what about your retractable? You have a retractable landing gear on this plane?
We do not.
You do not.
This
Okay,
is a B
we'll
model.
skip right through that then. Okay, well, how does it stay down then?
How does it stay down?
Bolted on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, during your run-up, you get a low voltage light. What could be a cause of a low voltage light? Or just, I don't know if you have a low voltage light, a high voltage light. What's the problem with voltage?
Yeah, so we could have a failed alternator.
Okay.
We could have a short somewhere in any of our electrical equipment.
Okay. What would be your response then if you start getting this erroneous voltage?
Well, it wouldn't fly. We'd be going back and then troubleshooting to see what is the cause. So if we did
Okay.
have
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What if you're already in flight and you start getting bad readings?
then I would be.
Let's say you have a discharge on your ammeter
Mhm.
and you have a improper voltage light.
Yep. So I would be finding a suitable place to land as soon as possible,
Okay.
and en route try to find the source of the problem by turning off equipment, circuit
Okay.
breakers, etc. And if we had a ways to go, keeping that non-essential equipment off.
Okay. What is load shedding?
Load shedding is turning off non-essential
Okay.
equipment.
How can you figure out what takes the most energy?
You can see that on the discharge meter if you had something
Okay.
you could
You could try turning it off.
disable it.
What else is something in the cockpit that shows us how much energy something can take? How many amps?
Amp meter.
Not, that's not what I'm going for.
Going for
How can you see what things, how much a given equipment is meant to draw or allowed to draw?
in the. You mean talk about like in a publication?
No, in the airplane. So this is getting kind of tricky, but it is something that can be helpful. So I want us to walk to it together. If you look at your aircraft, and I'm looking at, for example, we have electronic flaps. I don't know what you have. You probably do. Electronic flap, so that has a motor, versus, let's say, the starter of my aircraft. How can I tell which one of those draws more from the battery?
Is it the discharge meter? I mean, that's what
Not
we
looking
just
at
talked
the
about
discharge meter.
earlier.
Let's say our discharge meter might not be working right now. It's discharging. Obviously, yeah, we can look at what draws.
Mhm.
There's something else in the aircraft that can give us this hint. If we want to know, like, what should we shed for load shedding?
I'm at a loss on this one.
Okay. Circuit breakers. That's it. Each one will have a little number on it,
Oh.
5 or 1 or 20. That can show you.
That was a dumb moment.
Yeah. It's a really pointed question. But anyway, if you're load shedding and you want to know what's drawing the most load, you can look at your circuit breakers. All right. Do you have a steam or glass cockpit?
Steam.
Okay, so some of that isn't as important. Where does your airspeed information come from?
From the pitot and static tubes.
Okay. Right. We won't go depth into that. Let's say you're going to be flying at 10,000 feet, and your passenger starts to feel lightheaded. What are some of the things that this could be, and how would you remedy it?
So initially it could be hypoxia.
Okay.
So to remedy this, I would essentially descend.
Okay.
Get down to an area that had more dense air. See if that would remedy the issue.
Okay. Anything else you could think that it could be, and how would you address that?
And then just maybe general motion sickness.
Okay.
And addressing that. I don't know, typically, what is that? I mean, is it really a fix for motion sickness?
Depends on the person.
Yeah.
Look forward, get fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's say this passenger begins to panic, and they start moving around abruptly, and they just start breathing really quickly.
Okay.
How can you help calm them down?
So if they were in a sense hyperventilating, you could have them breathe into a paper bag.
Perfect. Yeah.
Is that what you're going for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Let's say you don't have a paper bag.
Then it would be timed breaths.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yep. Slow down their breathing.
Mhm.
Deep breaths. Okay. Now it's looking into making this flight or not making this flight. Your boss comes to you and he has a cold, and he really wants to fly. What warnings would you give him as a passenger? And if he still wants to make the flight, what can you do to make it a more comfortable flight for him?
So if he had a cold, he probably may have a sinus block.
Okay.
Which would mean that a change of pressurization would probably cause him or her slight discomfort of being able to essentially equalize the pressure between the inner ear and exterior pressure. Ways we could remedy this is by flying lower,
Okay.
or if we had a pressurized cabin airplane. I don't know what we're flying. I assume this is the Cardinal.
The Cardinal.
Yeah, so we'd probably be flying lower if we still really need to take this flight.
Okay. Perfect. All right. And what factors would make you reject a flight, even if weather and performance seemed okay?
Then I would go through the I'm safe acronym.
Okay.
So me as the pilot, am I safe? So am I suffering from any illness? Am I taking on any medications? Am I having any stress? Have I had any alcohol within the preceding 8 hours or blood alcohol less than 0.04? Am I fatigued and I have been eating and drinking properly?
Okay. Perfect. Yep. So just knowing that it's not always about weather and performance.
Also the pilot.
Pilot has minimums too. So that's where I would talk about here about minimums too. Do you have minimums?
I do have a personal minimum sheet.
Okay. And you keep those with you?
Yes, I do.
Beautiful. Yeah, so just being aware of these. If you wanted to, let's say you were thinking about, trying to push your minimums in a good way. Let's say you want to try to get your ceiling down from 5,000 feet. How would you go about doing that?
I would go up flying with a CFI.
Okay, overcome times. All right, perfect.
Mhm.
Is there anything that the FAA has done to help pilots keep,
Current
Current
and improve.
Yeah.
That's what's the FAA safety team website, the FAST website,
Sure.
is that
Yep.
right?
Yep, but they have a program. You know what the program's called?
I'm not sure. What
The Wings program. You heard of the Wings?
I have heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the FAA Wings program is a program that's designed to help pilots stay current, proficient, and in some ways even help them design minimums. And okay, perfect. All right, well, that was the last. I guess my last question would be, how do you recover from a spin?
Recovering from a spin, pulled power out, ailerons, elevator neutral, opposite rudder until you control the spin, and then slowly bring elevator back to level flight.
Yeah, I think you said elevator neutral there. Did you mean to say that?
Sorry, nose down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ailerons neutral.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right, beautiful. All right, that's all I have for you today. A couple things that we'll discuss here in debrief, but I think in general you did a really good job.
Thank you.
Yep. So especially on some of my kind of gotcha questions. We're first going to look at and debrief the commercial operations question asked at the beginning. If your boss asks you to fly as a company pilot, taking them to work meetings, is that okay? The short answer is yes. We went further on to discuss what if the boss is going to be transporting goods for the company. Is that legal? The short answer there is also yes. As long as the goods are of the business and they're not taking on other people's goods, that's fine. If your company is selling Twinkies and you're flying Twinkies with your boss to sell the Twinkies at the work meeting, that's fine. If you start taking on goods of other people or companies or other people, now you're getting into common carriage. And as we know with commercial, now you're going to need a commercial operating license if you're offering goods or a willingness to offer them to the general public. If you're staying just within the confines of your company, you're much more free to act within the realms of a commercial pilot's license without a commercial operator license. So that would be allowed. That was discussed. We kind of tried to bring it back, asked a couple questions to the candidate, kind of trying to check, are you sure? Are you sure? The candidate kind of doubled down as far as I could tell on if they're making any money on the flight, then it's not allowed. That's not true. If it's within the business realm and it's not doing common carriage, if we're not holding out to others a willingness to transport people or services or goods, then we're fine as long as we're doing it privately. So that's the commercial ops. Debriefing now, secondly, when we got into weather, there was just a little mistake here talking about low pressure fronts and high pressure fronts. A low pressure front does not have, is not characteristic for having good visibility. His reasoning was that the air will rise and that'll bring things away from the ground. And I kind of pried with him on that, and he mentioned that again, and that is technically true. So particles will be brought up into the air. The problem is that there are particles. A low pressure system is bringing things in. Air moves from a high pressure to a low pressure, so all of our particles, our nuclei in the air, dust particles are going to be coming into a low pressure area, and those are going to allow visible moisture to form. So that can be clouds, that can be fog, obviously mist, all those types of things will form in a low pressure system, causing bad visibility. And that can be even low to the ground and up in the air. Despite the fact that the air is rising, that can also happen low to the ground. In low visibility, you can think of a high pressure system as pushing particles away. It's pushing away the bad weather. You'll have clearer skies. In a low pressure, it's bringing everything in, and you're going to have bad visibility or worse visibility. The next thing was on VX versus VY. We had a proper discussion about what is VX and VY. What I was looking for in terms of absolute and service ceilings was what happens with VX and VY as we increase in altitude. This is something the candidate could not answer, and the candidate also didn't mention that they could go look for the answer, so that would just be incorrect. If you don't know the answer, at least be willing to go look and try to see where you can find the answer. As we increase in altitude, as we're flying up, VX will start to increase, and eventually it will reach VY. That's because VX has to do with excess thrust available. And as we go higher, air thins, and our excess thrust decreases. Our performance curve starts to shift as we start going up, our performance drag curve. So eventually, as the air thins, our thrust decreases, and we'll have to start pitching down to continue to having the same airspeed to keep the same rate of climb. Then we got a discussion about flaps in the wind. This wasn't something I was trying to be tricky about, but I have dealt with a lot of pilots who will just say, in strong winds, I'm going to use partial flaps. And the question I have is why? Do you really have an understanding? And what I wanted here from the candidate was just a competent discussion about why they would want to use partial flaps. What would be the benefit and what would be the drawback? Because there are pros and cons to doing something like that. And I don't think the more knowledge you have as a pilot, the better decisions you can make. So we don't want to just be saying, I'm going to do this because I was told to do it. We want to know why we're doing it. So I wanted some sort of discussion about what would be the benefits of using partial flaps, and I didn't feel like I got that. The candidate used terms such as we'll have more resilience, but that doesn't tell me resilience in terms of performance, resilience in terms of controllability, or resilience in terms of something else. What does resilience to the wind mean specifically? So I would like to use kind of more terms that are familiar to us in aviation. So something like saying that partial flaps will allow a quicker go-around, or one without losing as much altitude. If we think about a low-powered airplane with heavy flaps, like an early 150 with 40 degrees flaps, if I bring those flaps up a little bit, the transition to no flaps for a climb out will be a lot faster. So having partial flaps, I'm more ready for a go-around. Also, some aircraft, especially tailwheels, if they're coming in a 3-point Heavy flaps will block airflow to the rudder. So if I have partial flaps, I'll have better rudder control. More air will make it back to the rudder. So that's another reason where you just need to know your airplane. If the POH says use partial flaps for gusty winds, why? Why exactly? That's something helpful to know. So something mentioning things like that. He mentioned wing area. That's something to kind of just be careful of. Not all flaps. There are different types of flaps, and many flaps do not increase wing area. So that's something to be aware of too, especially if you're on an early trainer. It's very likely if you're using plain flaps or split flaps that you're not increasing your wing area much at all. So be aware of that as well. And something saying like with partial flaps, okay, we're going to use partial flaps. Well, there are cons to that as well. Are you aware of the cons? We'll putting partial flaps, you're likely actually reducing the drag. And at partial flaps, our airplanes usually have a higher lift to drag ratio. So if we're using partial flaps and we get a big gust, we're actually probably going to balloon more than we would with full flaps. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you're really dealing with gusty wind conditions, partial flaps, we might have more of a ballooning tendency. Also with partial flaps, now we have to increase our approach speed. Our stall speed has gone up. So with it, our approach speed is probably going to be going up as well to keep that safe margin. And with that, our landing distance increases. So that's another downside of using partial flaps. So why are you using partial flaps? And is it really worth it? You know, and at what wind condition would you use partial flaps? Those are the kind of things that a competent answer that I would want to hear. A really understanding of your aircraft is, you know, what wind conditions I'm going to start using partial flaps and why. What are the pros and the cons, and why have I decided that that's a good idea? And I don't feel like the candidate was answering to that level. And it might have partially been because he was confused by my questioning, but that's what I was looking for there. And then finally was the rich versus lean mixture. Here as well, I just wanted a discussion about what happens if I'm too rich, what happens if I'm too lean. Again, it seemed like the candidate was confused by my questioning, so I tried to rephrase it. Some of that could just be my inability to clearly state the question. But we kind of broke it through. I kind of walked through what I was looking for. With a rich mixture, you have more fuel to air, so you're going to be fouling your spark plugs, you can be fouling your valves, getting carbon buildup on parts of the engine, which can eventually lead to catastrophic failure in the engine. You can get valves shifting out of place more readily. You can get fouled spark plugs, which would lead to rough running engines, which is something that the candidate mentioned. You also have incomplete combustion, so you have a lesser performance of the engine. That was something that was also mentioned. And then what I was really looking for, the kind of more standard answer that we should be thinking about, is a higher fuel burn. Some of these engines, if you don't lean the mixture, if you forget to lean, you can be burning 5, 6, 7 gallons more per hour per engine. And then finally, if you're too lean, overheating, we talked about that a big part of fuel in our carburetors in our engines is for cooling the engines, especially when we're air-cooled engines. So when we're sitting on the ground during run-up or even just idle, we don't have the air coming in as much as we do when we're in cruise. So we need to run richer. So if we start running leaner, whether in cruise or on the ground, we risk overheating the engine. With overheating the engine, you can get detonation and pre-ignition, which we mentioned, from hot spots or excessive heat and pressure, leading to catastrophic damage to the engine. It's rare, but it happens. And then lack of efficiency as well. We don't have the perfect mixture for combustion, so we're going to be losing performance. So that's what I was looking for with the rich and lean. I would have been okay, honestly, with just, we just talked about cooling. I was wanting to hear, if we're too rich, we're burning more fuel than necessary. If we're too lean, we're not cooling the engine enough. So understanding that balance of why it's important to lean the mixture, both for longevity of the engine performance, but also just to make sure we're not overheating the engine and make sure we're not burning too much fuel. Those are things that we need to be thinking about on every flight, just to make sure that we can make it to our destination. So those are the kind of things that I debriefed with the student. There are other things we can pick at in it, but these are kind of 5 areas that we identified. Hope you enjoyed the video.